Hi, and welcome to your Inside Power, where we work to help you to realize the importance of what's inside of you in dealing with your world. So today our topic is on thinking. And we're not just talking, everybody thinks, right? But what we have to realize is that not everybody thinks in the exact same way. Sometimes people think just surface thoughts and think they're thinking, but we're talking about that deep thinking, the thinking that's really important if you're going to change your life. So we have to always consider what is it that we're thinking about and what thoughts are going through our minds. I'm sure you're like me, and at some point, some days, you wake up and you're just not feeling that great. Or during the day, it's like you things just don't seem like they're feeling right, and yet you can't figure it out because you think that you've done everything right. Well, there's lots of thoughts going around in our head. They say 50,000 thoughts are going around in our head every single day, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we're actually thinking them. But depending on what kind of thoughts you have can determine what's happening in your life. So think about this. We're talking about thinking. Life is a mystery. These are kind of deep thinking thoughts. Why are we here? Have you ever wondered to yourself, what is the purpose of me being here? What am I supposed to be doing with my life? Should I do what I think I should do, or should I do what other people think I should do? And you'll see parents doing that a lot, trying to influence their children as to what they think they should do, instead of allowing the child to decide and think for yourself. I tried to be very cautious of that because I was a musician. And so music was very important in my life, but I tried not to force my children to also be musicians. I wanted them to have the opportunity for sure. But if it wasn't them, then I had to accept that and realize that. But so often you'll see that children don't give it a chance to really think. And then they end up doing maybe what the parents are doing. Maybe if you have a business, you bring your child into that business, even though it's not what they want. But they don't really know because they've never taken the time to think about it. So life is a mystery. And, sometimes we have to think about what stories we tell ourselves. What stories do you tell yourself? You thought maybe at one point you weren't good enough. Why did you think you weren't good enough? What happened in your life to make you feel that way? What comments were made? And we really have to start looking back and deciding what happened and what stories am I telling myself, and are they true? Because a lot of them are not. There are our interpretation of them, maybe from our childlike life, or there are interpretation looking back. We may have a different vision of what really was going on now that we understand more. So life can be a mystery. And like the universe, keeps going. It keeps going. And we have to decide what we want on the other side. It's our choice. You see, that's what we have to realize, is that those deep thoughts can work for us or work against us. And can we understand life? Because life can be either a mystery or it can actually be ignorance when we don't use deep thinking to get there. So I want you to realize we are here for growth. That's what we're supposed to be doing. We're supposed to be learning and growing. So many people, and I just said this to somebody the other day, so many people think once they graduate from school, they're done learning. No, that's the beginning, commencement. It's the beginning, not the end. And so that's when you start learning. And, we have to realize that that's when we begin. Okay. So we are intended to grow and develop, and that's why we become wise. I was talking to a friend the other day, and I was saying about somebody I was working with, and they're very young and they don't have wisdom yet. And if they had that wisdom, they would be so much better, but their brain hasn't even developed. They're not, at 28 or 30 years old when your brain really develops. And so they haven't developed wisdom. And so while they may have knowledge, they don't have wisdom. And there's a difference. You see, we can think that it's knowledge that is thinking, and that the more knowledge you have, the more learned you are, but that's not true. Knowledge is only what you can learn and regurgitate to others. Wisdom is when you have more insight. And the goal is to become wiser as you move forward. And I know if I look back at myself in my 20s or 30s, I did some things that weren't really wise. But at the time, I had the knowledge and I thought I was doing the right thing. But we have to stop and look and really look at other perspectives. And we can see progress. So we see progress in society. I can look back and say, gee, when I was a kid, there were no microwaves. And colored TVs were just coming out when I was a kid. And, there's a lot of things that progress has changed. There's no such thing as a home computer. The first computer I saw in college was this massive thing in a room, and he had used the punch cards and things like that. And it was cutting edge, but not what we consider today. Nobody had personal computers. And so you can see that progress in society because we learn more and we move forward. And right now things are moving so fast. But do you have progress in yourself? Have you moved forward? Because as an individual, you have room for growth. And if you're not moving forward, you're actually disintegrating and you're going backwards. So you have to keep moving forward. And that all comes from thinking and spending time in that deep thought as to what it is that you want. Thinking and understanding becomes our step towards freedom when we really develop to that point. And as we think, that's where life becomes. And it's so easy to get discouraged when things don't go wrong. And that's the time you have to just pull out the stops and really start to do that deep thinking. Go back to what it is that you want. What life do you want to create? It's like obstacles get in your way, and they're put there intentionally because you have to learn something. I remember one of the most painful events that I went through as an employee, and it was so painful going through it. It affected me physically, mentally, and every which way, and I could not understand it because I was only trying to do something to help. And what I realized is that was something I had to go through. And once I went through it, I went to the other side and I saw a whole different part of who I was. And it's like I had to go through that painful experience to come out on the other side of it. And so obstacles will get in our way because we have to figure something out. So when you see an obstacle, don't use it as a discouragement. Use it as, this is a learning I need. And I need to go through this learning so that I can get to the other side and that I can become the person I was intended to become. And you only become that person when you've decided, what is your purpose? Why are you here? When you start to answer some of those questions, then you start to understand who you really are. So the average person believes that information that they have is thinking, and it's not. It's not the information and that knowledge that you learn. It's what you can do with it and how it helps further who you are. The knowledge is only will only get you so far. And I think you've seen it. There are people that have a lot of knowledge. They're not successful. They're very smart, but they're not successful. And then you see somebody that maybe struggles to read, maybe never got past much of a elementary education, and they're highly successful. It's not the knowledge. It's the way you go about doing things in a certain way, thinking in a certain way. And those people who appear like they are not very successful are thinking in a certain way. I remember running into in a group that I was in, and this guy who was, I think he was probably dyslexic, and really struggled to read, but he kept working at it. And he was worth millions and millions of dollars. And he probably had a lot of smart people working for him. And he was just highly successful. You see, it's not how smart you are or how much learning you have. Yes, that can be helpful, but it's, do you do things in a certain way? Do you think in a certain way? Which is what Wallace is talking about in his books. And spirit or infinite intelligence or God, whatever you want to call it, wants us to move to a higher level, to be closer to where we are more of a spiritual being. You see, we live on 3 planes at the same time. We have a physical body, we have an intellect that thinks, and then we have a spiritual side of us. And infinite intelligence or spirit or source energy or God, it wants us to be that higher side of us, that spiritual side. Yes, it's wonderful to be learning things and to expanding our intellect. Yes, it's good to be exercising our body and becoming, having our body, which is the temple we live in, becoming healthy. But we also need to start that deep thinking that gets us closer to the spiritual side of us and to finding our purpose. So we have desires, we have wants, and that spirit moving in and through us to put things out there so that we keep learning. And so when you get at that want or desire, something you just want to have, you start figuring out a way to get to that, and that spirit nudging you along the way. If you don't have many desires at once, it's probably because you've cut them off. You've cut off your connection with that source energy. And therefore you don't have any desires anymore. And you see that sometimes in people as they retire, they don't have anything to do. And you see this so often where people will not live long after they've retired. And it's because they had nothing to go after anymore. And so what was there to get up for in the morning? And we see this happening a lot with people. When you focus on a single sustained thought, and you can expand upon that thought, but when you focus on that, you start to attract to you what you need, the resources, the people. You start to understand what's going on. And so that's all part of the law of attraction. And so you can attract to you the good that you desire, or you can attract to you exactly what you don't want. And it all goes back to how you're thinking, the words you're saying. You're either attracting the good or you're attracting what you don't want. And you'll see this sometimes. People say, you ask them, what do they want? And they can just tell you what they don't want, but they don't really ever know what they do want. Or they'll say things like, I never have any money. Well, guess what? When you put that out there, that's what you're going to attract. Some businesses, people don't pay their bills, and you keep putting that out there, and then people don't pay you. So you have to be very careful the words you choose. You want to make sure that you're choosing the words for what you do want and not the words for what you don't want. Choose to be successful. I am, and then a positive thing that you want. And be careful you don't say, I will, because that's putting out in the future, and you need to bring it to you. So you have to build this picture of exactly what you want and get rid of the things that you don't want. So your life becomes what you think. So look around you right now, and your thought patterns, everything that you have brought into your life, you have brought into your life because of your thoughts. Thoughts are things, as Napoleon Hill says in his book, first sentence in his book, thoughts are things, and they're very powerful things. And we have to realize that. He goes on to say, thoughts are things and powerful things at that. When mixed with purpose, persistence, and a burning desire for their translation into riches or other material objects. Now, hopefully that doesn't offend you, but we are here to expand and grow. We are not here to suffer in misery. And the only way we can expand and grow is through our thoughts. Just like in the book, Science of Getting Rich. And I just picked this up because the very first paragraph is super important because it says, whatever may be said in praise of poverty, the fact remains that it is not possible to live a really complete or successful life unless one is rich. No man can rise to his greatest possible height in talent or soul development unless he has plenty of money. For to unfold the soul and to develop talent, he must have many things to use, and he cannot have these things unless he has money to buy them with. So it's really important that we get into this frame of mind that it's okay to want things. It's okay to want to develop wealth and to live a prosperous life, and not just prosperity in money, but prosperity in health and relationships and family and so on. But we have to realize that it's okay and there's nothing wrong with it. So we have to check our mental attitude toward things and events in your life. How do you respond to things? How do you respond to things that you want? How do you respond when things maybe aren't going the way you want to? And keep in mind, those obstacles are stepping stones to your success. Success is never a straight path. It's always going to have bumps along the way, always. And it's how your attitude is and how you deal with those bumps along the way that will determine your success. When we have a really good attitude, then we can respond to those obstacles as, I need to figure out how to deal with this. This is not what I expected, but maybe there's an opportunity there. You see, sometimes obstacles are just merely opportunities. But if you don't look at it that way, then you look at the opportunity as a discouragement. And sometimes those roadblocks are there and something is not going to work out because that's not the right path. And so it's like a message to you to say, that's not the right path you're supposed to be on. There's something better out there. Did you hear it? Better, not the same, better. And that's what you'll find. We also know that children, when they're brought up in a family that's very positive and loving and encouraging, they tend to respond that way when there is an obstacle. They tend to overcome that because that's the way they've been brought up. But a child who's been told that they're wrong and that they'll never amount to anything, and that's the way they will be brought about in life too. And they'll look at things as very discouraging. There's a story I read one time about a Major League Baseball player, and he had gone to a prison to share a little bit about his life, to be an encourager, to these prisoners. And so as he was there, he was talking about his dad and when he was a young boy, and so they'd be out in the backyard and they'd be playing catch, and he'd throw the ball and it'd go right by his dad, and his dad would, not get discouraged, not tell him, what he did was wrong. He'd say, man, anybody can throw a ball like that. It's going to play in the major leagues someday. And so then he'd have batting practice and he'd swing his bat and he'd miss the ball. And his dad would look at him and say, man, anybody who can swing a bat like that's going to play in the major leagues someday. And so one day he hit the ball and it went through the neighbor's window, and he thought he was really going to get in trouble then. His dad said, Anybody can hit the ball like that. It's going to play in the major leagues someday. And so his dad looked at him, or he looked at these prisoners and he said, so when I grew up, there was really nothing else for me to do but to play in the major league. Well, after he was done with this inspirational talk, one of the prisoners came up to him and said, I had a dad like you. He told me I'd never amount to anything and someday I'd probably end up in jail. He said, I guess I fulfilled his vision for me too. See, it was just a matter of words. You can be an encourager and can be very positive, or you can say things that are going to hurt. But either way, you can attract what it is. And you can attract the good you want, or you can attract exactly what you don't want. So that's why it's so important. Not only the words we think to ourselves, the thoughts that are things, but the words we say to others. Because we don't know how that word will spin around in their head for years and years, just like that man. And he ended up going to jail, just like his father predicted. And how sad is that? When he could have been somebody totally different, if only he had been brought up differently. So you can't change your past, but you can change your present or your future. However, there are some studies I've read where people can go back in their past and actually change it. There was a story about this guy who, when he was a child, fell off a swing. And when he fell off the swing, he injured his back. And so he used his mind, because he had back problems ever since. And so he used his thinking and he went back to that incident where he fell off the swing and changed that. And so he kept thinking about that incident and what it did to him, but he reversed it so it was not that negative back experience. And he actually got to the point where his back did not hurt. So there are some studies there. What we do know is that we can look back and check that story that we were telling ourselves that maybe is negative and see if we really saw it the right way as a child. I know for myself, I will do that, things that maybe as a child, I felt like somebody was telling me I wasn't good enough, but what they were telling me was something totally different. And check that story, because in our child minds, we think differently than when we can look back at it as an adult and see that story. So while we can't necessarily change everything in our past, we can look back and see if we're really reading it correctly, reading those stories correctly, and we can look at the present and how we can change our future. So what I want you to realize is that you admit to that moment in time when maybe thing wasn't quite right, and then you can shift your thinking. So going forward, your thought process is different. And that's what we have to do when we shift our paradigms, our habitual thought patterns. We have to go back and look at that pattern, see what it is, see what we need to change it, and then shift that thinking, because that habitual thought pattern is not serving us well. The way we think, our mental thinking, impacts our thoughts, our ideas, and our point of view. This is why, sometimes people can maybe look at an accident or situation that happened, and then somebody will come in to see, because they're witnessing it, and, get their witness account. And people can see the exact same thing with their eyes, but we don't see with our eyes, we see with our mind. And so our thought patterns go into it. And so they will actually come up with different scenarios or different stories as to what actually happened. And it's very common that you can see the same thing and interpret it differently. This is why, when you're talking to somebody and you might think, what are they thinking? How can they believe that? Well, They believe it because that comes from their perspective. And so when we realize that, we have to learn that, people have had different experiences that led them to where they are today. And that's all there in their minds. And so when they see something or they hear something, they're going to interpret it differently than you are. We don't all think the same. We haven't all had the same experiences. We did not grow up the same. And so because of that, our patterns of thought are different. So keep in mind, many times, obstacles, fears, worries are nothing but illusions. You think it's an obstacle, could be an opportunity. You think you're afraid of something and something bad's going to happen, but it never does, or rarely does. And so all that worrying, all that fear, all that did was attract to you what you do not want. And many times it doesn't happen anyway. So be very cautious as to how you think. And that brings to the point of, why do people let their present situations influence their thought patterns? It's perfectly normal, isn't it? But we have to realize that just because this is our present situation, we have choices and we have the ability to choose a different situation. And so that's what we need to do. So you have the power to choose your thoughts. You are given gifts from the higher power. We've all been given these inside intellectual faculties that only human beings have, to be able to empower us and empower our minds to think the truth, think what it is that we want, regardless of what we see in front of us. If you're in business, we're going to talk about ways to attract the good that we desire and to become prosperous in all areas of our life, and how to overcome all the limited thinking and the money thought patterns that we have. So I encourage you to join. The link is there for you to come to the masterclass and bring your questions and interact during that time period.